Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday the 26th of September. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 215 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then I'll introduce this evening's guest, and then together we will look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. A Russian man has shot the leader of the local military draft committee in the Siberian town of Ust-Ilimsk, which is in Irkutsk, after telling him he would refuse to fight in the war in Ukraine. Protests against Vladimir Putin's partial military mobilization order appeared to continue yesterday in the Russian Republic of Dagestan, with videos showing standoffs between police and the public. Sergei Tsekov, a member of Russia's upper house of parliament, the Federation Council, has called for the Russian border to be shut to ban anyone who is of military age from travelling abroad. Ukraine's Armed Forces General Staff has claimed that some Russian conscripts from the Kremlin's mass mobilization are being sent directly to the front lines in Ukraine without any training. The Russian news agency RIA Novosti is claiming that turnout figures for the illegitimate referendums in occupied Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson has been sufficient for the pro-Russian authorities to declare them legitimate. Energoatom, the state-run nuclear enterprise in Ukraine which manages nuclear power stations, including the occupied plant at Zaporizhia, has accused pro-Russian forces within Zaporizhia of staging the appearance that staff had voted in the widely condemned referendums being held in the region. Alexander Stryuk, Ukraine's mayor of Severodonetsk, has decried what he called the lies and propaganda of the referendum from the Russian Federation, accusing pro-Russian forces of busing people in from Crimea to vote and to stage propaganda photographs. The Serbian Foreign Minister Nikola Selakovic said Serbia will not recognise Russian annexation referendums in occupied Ukrainian areas. The UN's atomic energy watchdog said it is ready to hold talks with Russia and Ukraine on setting up a protection zone around the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has renewed calls for Western allies to cut Russian banks from the SWIFT global banking system that allows banks to send messages to each other. Moldova's president, Maya Sandu, has said that her country may revoke the citizenship of those who go to fight for Russia in Ukraine. Japan will ban exports of chemical weapons-related goods to Russia and is deeply concerned about the possible use of nuclear weapons, the Chief Cabinet Secretary, Mr. Matsuno-san, said yesterday. And the United States and its allies will act decisively if Russia uses a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, the US National Security Advisor says, reaffirming the Biden White House's previous response to mounting concerns that Vladimir Putin's threats are in increased danger of being realised. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined this evening by a regular friend to the programme. William Duguid is an activist, a commentator and a blogger, and he also helps to run the Perth and Kinross Yes Hub. William, good evening. How are you keeping?
Not bad at all. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Well, it's a pleasure to see you and thank you for joining us on Scotland at 7 this evening. Now, our first story, as you would expect, is that the pound has hit an all-time low against the US dollar after the bonanza of tax cuts and spending measures in Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget threatened to undermine confidence in the UK economy. The pound plunged nearly 5% at one point, down to $1.03, its lowest since Britain went decimal in 1971, as belief in the UK's economic management and assets evaporated. Even after stumbling back to $1.05, the currency was still down 7% in 2 sessions after the UK Chancellor pledged over the weekend to pursue more tax cuts. The pound came under renewed pressure on Monday afternoon after the Bank of England failed to announce an emergency interest rate hike. Anticipation had been building amongst investors that the bank would raise interest rates in response to the weakening pound, which hit a record low against the dollar over the weekend. The pound had regained some ground earlier on Monday, but the bank failed to calm markets when it stopped short of announcing a rate rise saying instead that it would monitor markets closely and assess the situation at the next policy meeting in November. The pound was then down nearly 2 cents at $1.6.75 after the statement. In an attempt to calm the panic, the Treasury then rushed out a statement this afternoon saying that next month the Chancellor will outline regulatory reforms to ensure the UK's financial services sector remains globally competitive, as part of what he calls his growth programme that was announced on Friday. This would be followed by the UK government's medium-term fiscal plan on the 23rd of November, which the statement said will set out further details on the government's fiscal rules, including ensuring that debt falls as a share of GDP in the medium term. Our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, responded to the economic crisis by calling for the recall of the House of Commons in a tweet this morning. She said, "It's hard to overstate the scale of the economic crisis caused by Friday's UK budget. While the very richest get tax cuts, ordinary people, already hit by soaring inflation, are about to be hit by rising interest rates. The House of Commons should be in emergency session now." So, William, there's plenty to talk about here in connection with this story from this, as it's unfolded today. In the rushed Treasury statement this afternoon, it said, building on this, as the growth plan set out on Friday, Cabinet ministers will announce further supply-side growth measures in October and early November, including changes to the planning system, business regulations, childcare, immigration, agricultural productivity, and digital infrastructure. Now, it struck me that that was quite an interesting list. Planning, childcare, and agriculture are all devolved to Holyrood, and effectively delivery of digital infrastructure has been devolved to Holyrood too, because Holyrood has had to step up and spend money to roll out digital infrastructure across Scotland. So, do you think any thoughts with regard to this list of supposed planned supply-side growth measures, and do you think that there's perhaps a hint of trouble ahead in respect of the aspects that are devolved?
There could be trouble ahead with the devolved aspects. It's the situation in which you would expect a normal UK government, if such a thing exists these days, to be talking to Scotland and to any of the other devolved nations that has these powers devolved. But this particular government notably does not consult. It merely acts, and then Scotland has to basically fill in the gaps and mitigate. So yes, there could be trouble, but even the changes to the supply side that are envisaged are in the future, and I suspect that before we get to that, there are going to be some crises that have to be absolutely confronted head on. So we may not even get as far as that list without major changes.
I completely understand that, William. It felt very speculative to me. It felt like a bit of a wish list. Now, the hastily issued statement from the Treasury this afternoon continued. As the Chief Secretary to the Treasury set out this weekend, the government is sticking to spending settlements for this spending review period. Now, inflation is already running at about 10%, and energy costs have doubled. So this means that, in effect, government spending is going to be cut in real terms. Now, Sir Nick Macpherson, who's a former boss at the Treasury, has pointed out this afternoon the UK will now pay a high-risk premium for the increased debt it is selling, making it all but impossible to live within current spending plans, even before inflation. He says that the Westminster government is expecting public sector workers to take bigger real terms wage cuts even than in 1931, which led to a mutiny. That's the mutiny at Invergordon on the 15th of September 1931. If the government presses ahead with this current plan, how far away do you think we are from another mutiny?
I think we're going to have a mutiny of sorts, and I think it's not at all unlikely, I think I've said this before, that we'll see a general strike before the year's out, because we're in a currently unsustainable situation. And I would argue that ordinary people are in an even worse condition now than they were before the mini budget on Friday, when there was some hope that there might be little help with the heating and that sort of thing. But in terms of any benefits from, say, the tax cuts, small as they already are for the lowest paid, they're going to be completely wiped out by the knock-on effect of the interest rate increase on mortgages, on landlords and rents. I mean, there is a rent freeze going to be happening in Scotland, but even that's going to be put under stress, I think. It's a horrible situation, and suddenly we're in this nightmare, and I just wish there were cooler heads that could prevail somewhere along the line.
That's a very good point. As we know, and we'll touch on this later, as we know, the most senior official at the Treasury was the first thing that Kwasi Kwarteng did was sack the most senior Treasury official and the most experienced civil servant working in Whitehall. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But also in terms of the politics, polling by Ipsos shows that this Truss government is now as unpopular as John Major was in 1992 after Black Wednesday. 70% of those polled are dissatisfied with the way the UK is being run. And then this afternoon, a former minister in Boris Johnson's government told Sky News that letters which could trigger a confidence vote in Liz Truss have already been sent to the 1922 committee chair, Sir Graham Brady. This unnamed government minister told Sky News, Liz is fucked. She's taking on markets in the Bank of England. He also said that Liz Truss and the Treasury ministers were playing A-level economics with people's lives. And he added that MPs are already putting letters in as they think she will crash the economy. So with that in mind, both in terms of what her colleagues are saying and in terms of the polling, how long do you think Liz Truss will be Prime Minister? Or looking at it from a slightly different perspective, how long will she retain Kwasi Kwarteng as Chancellor?
We're into times that are completely unpredictable with that sort of thing. I suspect she was hoping for a wee bit of bounce to go into the party conference with, but she certainly hasn't got that. She's got a full-blown crisis and an apparently absentee government, a government that's been absent one way or the other for most of the time, ever since the summer. And one of the potential drawbacks with unseating Liz Truss, and indeed Kwasi Kwarteng, is one, does that mean we continue with an absentee government during a time of crisis? And two, what does it do to the markets? I mean, another thing Nick Macpherson said, the last thing you want to do within the G7 is be an outlier. We're an absolute outlier. Our credibility as a financially competent nation, as far as certainly the government's credibility, is shot to pieces. And it's difficult to see what can bring that back, except something very major, like, I don't know, a government of national unity at some point. But how do you get to that?
Well, that's a very interesting point. I was going to ask you, William, is it at all appropriate in a modern democracy that an old Etonian chancellor who read classics at university can sack his most senior civil servant and then unveil a budget which nobody has voted for, with no scrutiny yet either in Parliament or yet by the Office of Budget Responsibility? There's no mandate for this budget. There's no mandate for this whole agenda. Is it fair to say that this entire clusterburg is completely and utterly illegitimate?
It's completely and utterly illegitimate, although since I read classics at university, I'm going to say that bit's all right. But the rest, you couldn't put it into a satirical piece. If you'd written something like this 5 years ago and say, hey, this happens in Britain, it'd have been laughed out of court.
No, as you say, it's completely unpredictable and beyond all realms of prediction. And actually, thinking, as you say, about 5 years ago or a few years ago, of course, we were told in Scotland in 2014 that an independent Scotland would have an economy in as much difficulty as Greece was then, but without the sunshine. But of course, as of this afternoon, the UK's 5-year bond yields are now more expensive, and that means worse, than those of Italy and, yes, Greece. So should we in Scotland now be collecting together all of the bitter together attack lines and using them to forecast what's going to happen next in Tory Britain?
I think most of the attack lines have already happened, haven't they? I mean, all the things that we were going to lose seem to have gone anyway. So, yeah, I think we need to be collecting some sort of attack line, though, and growing a backbone, because things are about to get mighty rough. And we need to find our way through this. It's not ideal to be considering an independence campaign in a downturn. I mean, we need to consider one, there's no doubt about that. But it's not the sort of conditions in which I would like to fight one, because people get alarmingly risk averse. And what we need now is people who are prepared to take a risk, but a risk that is relatively acceptable compared to the alternative of staying where we are. And we need to convince them. I was noticing at the stall we had on Saturday, there were a couple of people where we had long conversations of how bad everything was in the UK. And there was still just this reluctance to say, well, go for it, go for the lifeboat. Even if the lifeboat has a hole in it, the bigger ship has got a much bigger hole. So work for us still to do.
Absolutely. I think I was having pretty similar conversations on Saturday to you, in a sense, going, what is it going to take to persuade people when in the face of this? But I'm sure you'll have some more good conversations on the stall, and we'll begin to see people coming forward with their view as to how we should move forward, and how better an independent Scotland could be. However, let's move on now, because today the Labour Party conference started in Liverpool, and Labour Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has vowed to reinstate the top 45% rate of income tax and put the money into NHS recruitment. In her speech at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool today, she insisted the government's chaotic handling of the economy in recent days underlined that Labour was now the party of economic competence. In her speech, Ms Reeves promised that the next Labour government would spend the money raised from its income tax policy on boosting NHS staff, as overstretched health and social care workers prepare for another grim winter. Gordon Brown's plans for constitutional reform made a brief appearance at the Labour conference too. His plans were reported to include proposals to abolish the House of Lords, a promise first made by Labour in 1910 and which has so far never materialised. There were no details of any new powers for Scotland, with suggestions that the constitutional reforms would only apply to England. Despite its fleeting appearance, it still caused a major split in the party when two former Scottish Labour leaders rejected any suggestion that Labour should support devolving more powers to Holyrood. The SNP's deputy leader, Keith Brown, said Labour's endless prevarication and tinkering proves that independence is the only way to get rid of the Tories for good, something that has never been more vital in the current escalating economic crisis. Even by its elusive reputation, this was a fleeting appearance of Broon's Brigadoon, there 1 minute and gone the next. He continued, "We have heard it all before with Gordon Brown's notorious interventions, like promising before the 2014 referendum that a no vote would make the UK as close to a federal state as possible. The people of Scotland have seen through him. Broon's Brigadoon also offers Scotland nothing. It provides zero protection from Brexit, Westminster austerity cuts, Liz Truss's latest budget obscenity, power grabs and repeated Tory governments we don't vote for," he added. So, William, firstly, party leader Keir Starmer and his shadow chancellor Rachel Reeves appear to be enjoying their new hymn sheet, which is about sound finance and Labour being the party of responsible economic policy. Labour would reverse the cut to the additional rate of income tax at 45%, they said, and plough the revenue into hiring more nurses, which struck me as just about the Labour Party's perfect political position. So do you think, has it been a good day at conference for Sir Keir?
I suppose it's been a reasonable day. I suppose I've ceased to care, which is why I really haven't been thinking, I wonder how well they're doing at the moment. I don't think they got on a particularly good foot by all the flag waving, etc. yesterday, for example. But it can scarcely be anything other than a reasonable day for him, because his opponents at Westminster are falling to bits. This should be an open goal. And it's all very well to talk about sound finance. And yes, sound finance is important. But I think maybe some risks do need to be taken in building this economy back up to where it needs to be, just so that ordinary people are supported. Not the sort of crazy, fiscally insane risks that the Tories are taking, but maybe we should be putting the top rate of tax up to 50% and doing a wee bit more than just supporting the NHS. And maybe we should be looking at a redistribution of wealth back down to the poorest, rather than the large-scale transfer of wealth to the rich that we've just seen. I'd give it a B plus, and let's see where they go for the rest of the day. I do not like the rhetoric on Scotland because they never appear to have learned a thing.
That's a very good point, William. Obviously, it's only the right form of nationalism that is allowed, which means you can stand in front of a 40-foot wide Union flag, but not be an independent supporter for Scotland. And of course, that's ignoring the British Social Attitudes Survey published last week, which identified that 40% of Labour voters support independence. So it's going to be a big week for Sir Keir and the Labour Party in Liverpool. But already today, there was another story coming from Liverpool because the Northern Ireland Unionists have expressed alarm after the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, Peter Kyle MP, said he would be prepared to call a referendum on Irish unity if certain conditions were met. Mr. Kyle said he would set out the criteria for calling a border poll if Labour were in power. And that's what he told the BBC at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool today. If the circumstances emerge as set out in the Good Friday Agreement, I, as Secretary of State, would not play games, he said. I would call the border poll. I am saying I am not going to be a barrier if the circumstances emerge. Under the 1998 agreement, a Secretary of State must call a referendum if it appears likely a majority of those voting would want the region to leave the UK. But the agreement does not specify the criteria, a vagueness that the UK government and their unionist supporters have been keen to maintain. The Irish government, Sinn Féin, and the Social Democratic and Labour Party, the SDLP, have pushed for clarity on the criteria, which would lay out the steps needed for a vote that could abolish the state of Northern Ireland and unify the island. Mr. Kyle said Sinn Féin's emergence as the biggest party in Northern Ireland and last week's census results, which showed Catholics outnumbering Protestants, did not suffice. He said, we're not even in that circumstance yet, so when we move towards the point where those circumstances set out in the Good Friday Agreement start to emerge, and it becomes a priority for the people of Northern Ireland, I will act, he said. So, William, under the 1998 Belfast Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, a Secretary of State must call a referendum if it appears likely a majority of those voting would want the region to leave the UK. So Peter Kyle's just spelling out what the Good Friday Agreement says. He's just being honest. Is it that honesty is what is scaring the unionist horses?
I think they've been expecting this for a little while. It was always going to be the case that at some point the Catholic population would outnumber the Protestant population in Northern Ireland. And Peter Kyle is spelling out what the Good Friday Agreement says, and he's still ploughing a very careful line because he's still saying, ooh, we're not quite there yet. But of course, when the time comes, I will do something. And all politicians will do this. However, I can understand to some extent the alarm of the unionists, but that's democracy for you.
Well, that's absolutely right. Yet another Westminster politician saying now is not the time. The Sinn Féin MP, Chris Hazard, welcomed Peter Kyle's comments as recognition that the current position was unsustainable. He said, it's having your head down in the sand simply to deny the fact that constitutional change is coming, that people are talking about this, civic society and political parties and all around us, the South Down MP said. So if it is if constitutional change is coming and people are talking about it and that denying it is unsustainable, do you think there's any chance that Anas Sarwar might take a leaf out of Peter Kyle's book and face up to the constitutional reality of the future of Scotland?
Well, I think I said earlier that Labour, particularly in Scotland, but possibly in the UK generally, don't ever seem to learn a thing. And they're still repeating the same old tropes. They're still, at their conference, mischaracterising the Scottish independence movement as an ideologically nationalistic group, whereas I would say we're a pragmatic group. And we understand the fundamentals of democracy, and we feel that this is the best outcome for Scotland and the people who live and work there, including many English people and many people from other places as well. We're not, as I don't actually regard myself as a nationalist. I just support Scotland governing itself. So they have a lot to learn if they want to win the people back here, and I don't think they're making any progress.
I think I have to agree with you there. It's been a while, and there's certainly no sign of any progress coming out from Liverpool this week so far. But let's move on now and look at politics from the opposite direction, because the far-right politician Giorgia Meloni has claimed victory in Italy's elections, as the almost complete results give her far-right-wing coalition a clear majority. Fratelli d'Italia, the Brothers of Italy, Meloni's party, that has neo-fascist roots, looks set to take share of the votes within the coalition, which includes the other far-right League and Forza Italia parties, which is headed by Silvio Berlusconi. Matteo Salvini, the head of the League, has said he would work with Meloni to form a long-lasting, stable government. The anti-immigration politician is seen as a potential weak spot for Meloni's chances of forming a government in the weeks ahead. Enrico Letta, the leader of Italy's centre-left Democratic Party, plans to step down after defeat in the national election. He described the vote as a victory for the far right-wing alliance led by Giorgia Meloni as a sad day for Italy and Europe. So, So, William, coming after the results of the general election in Sweden and recognising how right-wing the government in Westminster is, this is all quite depressing. It seems kind of inevitable. It feels very much like we're perhaps in 1933 again. Should we be worried?
I think we should be worried. I mean, maybe not for the precise reasons that we should have been worried if we'd seen the future in 1933. I'll temporarily exempt the far-right UK government at the moment, because nobody actually voted for the government that was that far-right. So we'll wait to see what the voters say about that at some point. But certainly there is a trend throughout Europe to move towards far-right parties and to install them, even in coalitions, but certainly I think really connected, most likely, with immigration and things like that. And this is a problem, because immigration is going to be with us for many years to come. As a result of climate change, there will be large-scale movements of people from the parts of the earth that are affected to the parts affected where life is more sustainable. Life will simply become unsustainable for people in some places. And that will happen irrespective of what we do now about climate change, I believe, because I think that has gone past. And we need to get to grips with the fact that that will happen and start preparing for it. And I rather think we're actually turning a blind eye to it and thinking it can be brushed away. And I worry about what will happen over those 20 years when that migration really starts, given the strength of political feeling that seems to be popping up in so many places.
Absolutely, William. Thank you. I was going to ask you what you thought the difference was between Fratelli d'Italia and the Conservative and Unionist Party, but we'll come back to that. We'll dodge that one for a moment. However, earlier today, the acclaimed Italian writer Roberto Saviano, who was the author of the expose of organised crime in Naples, the book Gomorrah, has posted a stark message after his name started trending on Twitter this morning. He says, "I have read that Saviano is trending because Meloni voters are inviting me to leave the country. These are warnings. This is the Italy that awaits us. They are already drawing up a blacklist of enemies of the homeland, in spite of those who said that fascism is another thing." So, and Saviano had written in The Guardian last weekend saying that Meloni appears the most dangerous Italian political figure, not because she explicitly evokes fascism or the practices of the black-shirted squadristi, the militia, but because of her ambiguity on those things. So it's perhaps a truism that fascism doesn't arrive in wearing a black uniform, carrying a burning torch. It arrives in a smart suit, smiling and offering easy answers by blaming others. So is that what you think we're seeing here, and what Roberto Saviano is warning us about?
Well, I think he will be aware of his situation, and he may already have had some threats, I don't know. Fascism does arrive wearing nice clothes, and often it arrives as a bit of a joke as well, and then it gets a bit more serious. And yes, ambiguity is one of the tools. Politicians are always ambiguous about everything, of course, but I think this could be problematic. It'll be very interesting to see how the EU deals with that. There are all sorts of links with what's going on in the EU, and of course she's previously, I think, been a fairly extreme Eurosceptic, but there are such things as the COVID fund that still needs to be paid out. So there needs to be some ambiguity and some pragmatism, but what happens after that's not required anymore? Maybe the government will collapse before then. Italian governments often do, but the general trend is not good.
As you say, the general trend, and as you also rightly say, it will take some time for a coalition government to be assembled, not least with the difficulty that that Matteo Salvini is presenting to creating that coalition government. So I'm sure we'll be back talking about Italian politics very soon. But we'll move on now, because Iranians have taken to the streets for a 10th consecutive night to protest against the death of Mahsa Amini in defiance of a warning from the judiciary. Officially, at least 41 people have died since the unrest began, mostly protesters, but including members of the security forces, but sources say that the real death figure is higher. The Norway-based group Iran Human Rights said on Sunday evening that the death toll was at least 57, but noted that ongoing internet blackouts were making it increasingly difficult to confirm fatalities in a context where the women-led protests have spread to scores of cities. Images circulated by IHR show protesters on the streets of Tehran shouting "Death to the dictator," purportedly after nightfall on Sunday. Echoing a warning the previous day by the president, Ibrahim Raisi, the judiciary chief, Gholam Hossein Mohseni Ejei, on Sunday emphasised the need for decisive action without leniency against the core instigators of the riots, the judiciary's Mizan online website said. Hundreds of demonstrators, reformist activists and journalists have been arrested amid the mostly nighttime demonstrations since unrest first broke out after 22-year-old Mahsa Amini's death in police custody on the 16th of September. Ms. Amini had been detained by Tehran's morality police for not wearing her hijab properly. Iran's largest protests in almost 3 years have seen security forces fire live rounds, while protesters have hurled rocks, torched police cars, and set fire to state buildings. Some female protesters have removed and burned their hijabs in the rallies and cut off their hair, some dancing near large bonfires to the applause of crowds that have chanted Zan, Zendegi, Azadi, or Woman, Life, Freedom. So, William, are you surprised by these ongoing reports of widespread protesting against the Raisi regime, and also of men taking steps to support women and join them in defending their rights?
I'm certainly intrigued to hear it. This was a story that featured this time last week when I was on, and I didn't think we'd still be talking about it a week later. You can never really tell, I think, with a popular uprising whether it's actually taking root and taking wings, or whether it's the suppression tactics that come immediately in will work out. So I'm just watching with interest, and we shall see what happens next with it. But I do hope that at some level it's concluded without too many deaths and injuries and just another mess for a country that's had too many messes to deal with in the past.
Absolutely. I was remembering on the weekend, I'm old enough to remember Iranians seeking refuge in Scotland after the fall of the Shah, and it feels like we're heading back to a very difficult place in Iran again. Now, there was a story, a question I was going to ask you at the top of the programme, but we didn't get to it because earlier this afternoon, Halifax, which is the UK's biggest mortgage lender, said that because of the unpredictability and the difficulty of funding arrangements at the moment, that they were going to withdraw all of their mortgage products that involve charging a fee. And I'm just seeing news now that Virgin Money, which you and I would know as Clydesdale, and the Skipton Building Society have now withdrawn deals for new customers as the drop in the pound leaves banks unable to price their products. So we know that the Westminster government and the growth plan that was announced on Friday was talking in England about cutting stamp duty on house transactions. Is there much point in cutting stamp duty on house transactions if people can't get mortgages?
Well, of course there isn't. This happens when you take actions that result in chaos. This is what chaos is. It's inherently unpredictable. And that's why you can be talking about things you might be doing 2 or 3 weeks down the line. And the Bank of England might be saying, well, we'll do something at some point, so watch out. But actual lenders working in the market are now taking action to protect their positions. And the knock-on effects from that are also chaotic in their own way, and we don't know where it goes. I'm not sure we're getting away with having an absentee government during this period. I think we're beginning to look at what is going to turn into an emergency recall of Parliament. And frankly, that can't come soon enough, because we need hands on the tiller, and we need sensible hands on the tiller. And we need listening to each other. People get very made.
That's a good point that you're making, William. Something that crossed my mind this morning in the context of broader politics. Do you think that we obviously during COVID saw a very sharp contrast in approach and performance between the First Minister and the then Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson? Do you think that the ongoing absence of government in Westminster and the chaotic events and results of government policy in Westminster, do you think that in terms of politics, that it will be possible to contrast that sufficiently clearly and sharply with the different approach that's taken by politicians in the Scottish government, and that might give some comfort or some support to people who are wondering about how Scotland would operate as an independent country?
I think it's very possible, and Nicola Sturgeon is not only a sensible politician in terms of how she puts things and how she appears, but she's also aware that it does have a positive effect on the idea of Scottish independence. That was one of the reasons why, when she was doing COVID briefings, people like Lord George Foulkes were so desperate for her to be the telly. Yeah, use it, because we need everything we can get to make this make for Scotland as well as for the UK, because otherwise we are going to be looking at a tremendous rebuild, and I don't much fancy that. I'd much rather be getting on with positive stuff.
Absolutely. Recovering from the chaos at the moment is going to take some time. You're absolutely right. Let's move on now, however, because an innovative hydrogen train project led by the University of St Andrews has successfully completed its next phase of testing and is on track, no pun intended, to help the Scottish Government meet its ambitious net zero carbon targets. The project is a partnership between the University of St Andrews, Transport Scotland, Scottish Enterprise, Ballard Motive Solutions, Abbott Risk Consulting, Arup, Aegis and Angel Trains. Testing of the hydrogen-powered train took place at the Scottish Rail Preservation Society, which is located at Bo'ness, last month, and it included a series of workshops to define the future strategy for rail decarbonisation in Scotland and provided demonstration runs of the train with key stakeholders and project partners. The project entailed the conversion and reuse of a 40-year-old 3-car Class 314 train to a hydrogen fuel cell electric powertrain. The X-Class 314 train has been retractioned and reclassified as a Class 614 hydrogen-powered train. Testing on track and the engineering development required to implement the conversion has kick-started the growth of a critical skills base for hydrogen trains in Scotland. Green hydrogen produced from the on-site electrolyser connected to the temporary refueler played a key role during the demonstration of the project. Refuelling infrastructure and its location will be critical to future train deployments. The funding support from Angel Trains for the electrolyser was pivotal to delivering a train running on green hydrogen. This innovative project has driven a huge amount of learning from converting existing rail rolling stock and has shown how this can create new supply chain opportunities and skills for the emerging green economy, while at the same time reducing emissions from the Scottish rail sector. The Scottish Government has set a target date to decarbonise passenger rail transport by 2035. Excuse me. So, William, Jenny Agnew, the director of the Hydrogen Accelerator at the University of St Andrews, said testing and demonstrating this train was the next step in showing that the clean energy transition is a reality. The project is on target to deliver the critical understanding and knowledge to make hydrogen-powered rail a reality in the not-too-distant future. Do you think that, William? Do you think that the positivity and enthusiasm of Mr. Agnew is correct, and that there is a prospect to deliver hydrogen-powered rail as a reality in Scotland pretty soon?
I think from a technical perspective, it's looking good. And the other important thing that you mentioned there was the building of the skills base, because all of the new things have to do are going to require people with the skills to execute them. And we went through 3 months of Commonweal Zoom meetings when we weren't able to meet physically in Perth and Kinross, going through Commonweal's Green New Deal book, the Common Home Plan, and it was covering all sorts of sectors, not just transport. And skills always came into it as the big thing, and indeed where the opportunities will be. So yes, it's a positive step. Question though, can we totally decarbonise by 2035 if limited for powers? And I don't know. I hope we can, but let's hope that before then we get the powers by getting independence and doing this properly and funding it properly, because the skills are there, the energy is clearly there, and it has to be done.
That's a very good point, William. I think I'm right in saying that there are already hydrogen-powered ferries operating in Norway, and there are steps to build hydrogen-powered aircraft now. So yes, the need to be at the forefront of those developments, and as you say, benefiting from developing and then spreading the skills which allow the decarbonisation are going to be really important for the future. But there's another aspect to decarbonisation that's in the news this evening as well, because 10 companies have been awarded a total of £9.4 million to help Scottish industries reduce carbon emissions through decarbonisation and energy efficiency projects. The recipients from the second round of the Scottish Industrial Energy Transformation Fund are predominantly involved in the manufacturing and food and drink sectors. The projects include a more energy-efficient dryer at a seaweed processing facility, while several brewers and distillers will also receive funding for projects that aim to reduce the emissions that are created during energy-intensive manufacturing processes. The projects awarded funding have the potential to reduce emissions by 40,482 tonnes of carbon dioxide every year. That's the equivalent of the annual emissions of 17,000 households. A further £160,000 has also been made available to conduct up to 4 engineering and feasibility studies into future projects that will aim to reduce emissions and increase efficiency within the sector by creating a pipeline of future projects. The First Minister announced the funding while visiting Graham's family dairy, where previous funding allowed them to upgrade steam production and heat distribution infrastructure. The First Minister said, "Reducing emissions in our manufacturing sector will be a crucial step in ensuring Scotland reaches its net zero target by 2045. I'm pleased that the Scottish Industrial Energy Transformation Fund continues to support companies across the sector to embrace decarbonisation, improve efficiency, and reduce their impact on the environment." This week is Scotland's Climate Week, which puts a renewed focus upon the ongoing climate emergency and our efforts to tackle it. And as households and businesses struggle with rising energy costs, it has never been more important to support industry to become more energy efficient. I welcome the work that the fund has already supported, and I hope that many more businesses will apply in the future. Up to £34 million of Scottish Government funding will be made available through the lifetime of the 5-year scheme, which runs until 2026. The third round of applications is now live. So, William, this seems particularly timely, firstly, as you and I were discussing earlier, because of the climate emergency, but also now because of the energy cost crisis. Distilling, for example, uses a great deal of energy, so reducing the energy use will reduce the cost of the whisky. Does this demonstrate perhaps why Westminster has been so short-sighted when it halted investment in the better domestic insulation for homes and associated schemes south of the border?
Yes, I think it does. I think it's good to see the Scottish Government doing what it can with what it's got to try and promote for climate change response. in companies and in individual households. There's such a lot to do, but it's good to see something being done. And I don't get the same vibes coming out of the Westminster government at all. We're talking about a dash within a dash for gas, and that gets us nowhere. So yeah, top marks for this one, and may there be more of it.
Thanks, William. The dash for gas is right. I mean, will you not consider the shareholders of Shell and BP first? But no, you're absolutely right. There's another story that's related, also in the news in Scotland today, because small areas of woodland on farms and crofts will soon attract funding supporting sustainable agriculture under planned changes to legislation. From November, small woodlands approved under the Scottish Rural Development Programme since 2015 can be utilised as ecological focus areas to support farmers' greening payments. The move will encourage farmers, crofters and land managers to increase tree planting, providing environmental benefits including tackling climate change and nature loss. The Rural Affairs Secretary, Mary Gudgeon, said, "Forestry in Scotland is a real success story, and this legislative change will mean that tree planting in small areas becomes an attractive option for farmers and crofters." This move continues the strong progress towards achieving our tree planting targets by working closely with farmers, forest industries, and landowners of all sizes. So, William, I had a momentary thought that this story about small woodlands was about promoting bonsais, but no, it's about small woodland areas. But in terms of providing support and working closely with farmers, forest industries, and landowners of all sizes, should we be supporting extraordinarily wealthy landowners financially to plant trees? I'm pretty sure the Duke of Buccleuch owns lots and lots of trees.
Sure, he does. And this is one of the issues. We're going to need a lot of wood, and we're going to need a lot of different mixes of wood as we build things in a sustainable way going forward. Just about everything in the Common Home Plan, to hark back to that again, one of the things was just how much of wood of various types you would require. So we should be promoting tree planting everywhere, but you promote it where you can. I would much rather deal with the Duke of Buccleuch in other ways that might have to do, to an extent, with land reform, perhaps. And I certainly wouldn't want to be too much money at him, but I think somehow people with money seem to attract money at the moment, so there's maybe nothing I can do about that.
I was just about to make that exact point. The Rural Affairs Secretary, Mary Gudgeon, did make reference to the fact that Scotland has been making strong progress towards achieving tree planting targets, and that work it takes place right across across the investment that Scottish Government makes. I recall that at least 1 million new trees are being planted as part of the dualling of the A9, for example. So Scotland's been performing comparatively well in new tree planting over recent years. So is there actually a need to be increasing focus and doing more than we're already doing?
I think much of our construction is going to be wood-based rather than what we currently build things from. A lot of insulation might well have wood involved in it. There are all sorts of uses for we will require. So apart from anything else, it does help to echo carbon in a healthy way. It's a carbon sink having lots of trees around, and it's natural of our land before it into other things by large landowners. So I'm all for it. I think we should carry on doing what we can, and it obviously is part of a range of things, but it will make a difference.
Thanks, William. And it was timely that you mentioned construction there, because our final item this evening is talking about construction. A new devolved tax will encourage greater use of recycled and other sustainable materials by the construction industry. A consultation has begun to inform future legislation on a replacement for the UK's aggregates levy. The levy is payable when newly quarried products like sand or rock are used for commercial purposes, including house building, infrastructure, and landscaping. The Scottish Government intends to use the Scottish Aggregates Levy to support the circular economy by encouraging the use of recycled aggregates in the construction industry and supporting innovation. This consultation seeks views to help inform the Scottish Government's final approach to the Scottish Aggregates Levy Bill, outlining key arrangements for a future tax. It invites comments on a range of issues, including the rationale for and scope of the tax, and whether exemptions and reliefs should be included in the legislation, the operational arrangements, including how best to make use of online technology, and the case for introducing a new sustainability fund and what type of projects such a fund could aid. The Public Finance Minister, Tom Arthur MSP, said the extraction and production of aggregates like crushed rock and sand creates and supports jobs, including many in our rural communities. However, we know that extraction of new materials can also have an environmental impact. These proposals are intended to drive up recycling and reuse rates, helping the construction industry meet its climate and sustainability commitments, and protecting Scotland's natural environment by reducing the need for virgin materials. So, William, the construction industry is estimated to be responsible for about 38% of carbon dioxide emissions. So that's quite a big target to aim at, isn't it?
It's going to make a difference if we can make this sort of thing work. Yes, undoubtedly. Again, it's good to see us thinking about it and people in the consultation. I only hope that a reasonably large number of people take the time to read what's proposed and to have their say, because it is a way of having your say, and it's not, it's not just how it's something that is looked at. I expect the usual suspects, and again, here we are with Commonweal. I seem to be doing an advert for Commonweal tonight. I'm sorry. Commonweal will be there. They will undoubtedly be responding to this, and to see what the likes of Craig Day and McAlpine have to say about it. It's an important part of the way we do things. I've never been consulted very much for the 30 years that I lived in England, so we should treasure that and make sure we support it.
Yes, the consultation is a two-way process, and so if we don't participate in it, it doesn't happen properly. So your point is right, and you're welcome to advertise Commonweal anytime. But it struck me that looking at this a little bit more widely, that this proposed Scottish aggregates levy will be administered by the Scottish Government and Revenue Scotland. Now, Revenue Scotland currently administers the landfill tax and the buildings transaction tax, the replacement for stamp duty in Scotland. I wondered, is this then an opportunity for Revenue Scotland and the Scottish Government to demonstrate that the Scottish Government could be and should be responsible for a larger share of taxation activity in the UK, not least also because of the different approach to benefits and taxation which Ben Macpherson has outlined in terms of taking a more humane approach to the social security side of the coin, and perhaps there's an opportunity here for Revenue Scotland to demonstrate that also a people-focused and community-focused approach to tax means that they ought to be given the powers to do more.
Well, it certainly can be used for that, and I would encourage them to that angle. The problem with it is that it's only in outlets such as this that you're going to hear about it, because I don't see it coming up in Reporting Scotland. Reporting Scotland might talk about it if there's a problem with it. There are a lot of things going on at a reasonably small level, but a growing level, where the Scottish Government is demonstrating far greater competence than is available to the Westminster Government, it would appear. Maybe that's not a very high bar at the moment, but it has been higher. It should prove that we're able to do it so that people recognise it when they think in terms of voting yes. I think we've already demonstrated it, to be fair, and that maybe there should be different arguments related to independence as well as that. But yes, I think this is something that we should be shouting more from the rooftops as far as we can.
Thank you, William. We'll always try and shout it from these particular rooftops whenever we get the chance. But that, I'm afraid, is all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs, and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programs, to continue to develop the station, and to make new programs for you. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you. Thank you very much. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, then please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers because that will enable us to employ staff to make more programs. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. While you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us again then. That's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8, and so I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching, and I'd like to give very special thanks to our very special guest, William Duguid. Thanks, William.
Thank you. It's been fun again.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the programme this evening, William. Thank you. On this day in 1902, we saw the death of William Topaz McGonagall, widely celebrated as the worst poet ever to have written in the English language. I hope that we have phrased our discussions this evening a little better than perhaps Mr. McGonagall would. I'm away to organise a second mutiny at Invergordon. Please have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.